Hello, everybody. This is Joshua Hatton with One Nation Under Whiskey podcast. I'm joined today, and I'm joined as always by Jason. I'm watching him. I'm looking at him through my phone because we're FaceTiming right now. And Jason, you have, as I was talking, you had this look on your face like, what's he going to say? What's he going to do?
No, it wasn't even about the future. It was about the past.
Oh, the past.
It was the way in which you said Hatton. Hatton. Like those were two very overly pronounced T's. Hatton.
Well, because I think the last time I tried to do the intro, I fell into the typical Connecticutian accent, which is Hatton. Hatton. Mm-hmm. And so I just wanted to, I'm taking a card from Matthew Rhys's hand.
Oh, Emmy award-winning actor Matthew Rhys, good friend of the pod.
He mentioned the word because we were asking him, is it easy to do an American accent? Is it difficult to do an American accent? And somehow he mentioned the word butter. And he said, use an American accent, you say butter. But then he said, that word has two T's. I shall like to use one of them.
That was the word I remember being chastised for the most growing up. Was because in southwest Scotland, it's easy to say bar.
Oh, bar. Yeah.
Bar. And milk. Milk and bar.
Milk?
Milk and butter.
Milk and butter.
And it would drive my mom to distraction. Absolute distraction.
Did she not grow up in the southwest of Scotland? Where did she grow up?
She did. She just hated the way people around her spoke.
Oh, okay.
Her position was if you enunciated clearly and spoke slowly, you could go anywhere in this world and people would understand you. But if you stuck to the habits of your locale, it would be much more difficult.
She's not wrong. Yeah.
So I would forever be chastised on milk bar. And to which point when I you travel around Scotland with me enough, right? There's not everybody thinks Jason's from Scotland. So
no, most people think you're from Ireland, which I know you love.
Water off a duck's back. It's more, now I've got the transatlantic accent. Obviously not leaving the country these days. I'm just going to fall deeper and deeper into whatever the hell it is I say in Virginia. But that first trip back to the homeland will be a good one. I'll be hoots-monning it up.
You've been in Virginia for 6 years now?
8, correct.
Has it been 8 already?
It has been 8, yes.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so you've been in Virginia for 8 years.
That's why I asked you the other day, how long have you been in your quote-unquote new house?
Right, yeah, which is 5 years. Yeah, come July 1, that was 5 years in our new house.
There you go, right? There you go.
But so the question that I have, you've been in the U.S. for 19 years, right?
It'll be 19 in December.
19 in December, right. So you started off in Colorado.
Good, yep. You got your starter for 10.
Good. And then you moved up to the PNW, up to the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, where I moved is the inland Northwest, but yes.
Oh, that was up in the Palouse.
In the Palouse?
Oh, Palouse, not Palouse. Okay.
The way you sounded it, right? The way you said it rhymed with blues, and so. And I think it should rhyme with blouse, but I'm just making this up now. So don't take me as your as your expert. Okay, I'm curious where this is going. Continue.
So you go to Colorado, you go up to the Palouse, then you went up to the town of Olalla, which is on the Puget Sound.
Beautiful. I'd love to move back to Olalla. Yep.
And then from the Puget Sound, you moved to the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, which is this the longest?
What's remarkable about this is you've just got all of my banking security questions correct. So congratulations, you're in my account.
That's me buying a blow-up doll.
If you need house numbers to go with street addresses, more than happy to. First dog's name, Bob. There you go. Work with that.
Did you get a social security number when you moved here? Just curious. I mean,
do you need the number? Last 4 digits?
I'll take all 9 of them. I had to think.
I got a social security number in summer of 1994 when I spent 3 months working at my cousin's Schlotzsky's Deli in Dallas.
In Dallas, yes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So
either 94 or 95. I think that was 95. 94, it was just totally under the counter. But I think 95, I got a social security card.
The point I'm slowly trying to get to here is, so you've been in Virginia the longest out of all of them, yes?
No. Because we were on the Palouse from 2002 until 2011.
9 years. Okay.
Yeah. We just spent 2 years in Colfax before we then spent 7 years in Pullman.
That's right. Okay. The whole reason for this line of questioning.
I'm loving it. I'm having a blast.
Have you picked up any Virginia-isms? Like, because your accent has degraded over the years. Mm-hmm. Like, what from where you are now have you bolted on to your? Is it an accent? Is it a phraseology? Like, what is it?
So, I'm glad you asked this question. I was just thinking about this the other day. And here's what's quite peculiar. We've been in Virginia for these 8 years. We have virtually no Virginia friends. And that's not to say we don't have any local friends. It's to make the point that when you move into an academic community, you end up befriending people who are also of the nomadic lifestyle, who have also moved here from somewhere else.
Sure.
And so you don't necessarily pick up the vagaries of the local dialect. You instead either, pick up the vagaries of what somebody else has brought here, or to my mind, you don't really pick up anything. You just hold dear to what it is you bring to the equation.
Sure.
And so, we've got local friends who are from Pennsylvania, who are from Maine, who are from New Hampshire, who are from the Pacific Northwest. And it's very rare the people we know from Virginia. And those people we do know from Virginia went somewhere else to get their schooling to then return to Virginia. And so they're not necessarily, holding fast to patterns of dialect that are, many decades old. And so I'm sure we're all picking up something from each other, but it's, to my mind, it's not discernible as something from the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia.
Okay. Well, it's just
because I'll be honest. My wife, I think, says more Pennsylvanian things than she does any other region, and she hasn't lived in Pennsylvania in the better part of 2 decades. But she'll say things like "mere" when she means mirror, right?
Mirror?
Mirror. M-I-R-R-O-R. Mirror.
Does she say drawer as well?
Maybe.
Or draw. Some people say draw instead of
I've stopped
drawer.
listening by that point. Like drop your drawers?
No. Like
I've stopped listening at that point. I've just done what I've been told.
No, if you go to your dresser and you open up a drawer. I would say drawer.
Yeah, she probably does
the draw.
Shrink it quite considerably. Yeah, she says hat instead of hot, and so when she comes out, it's hot outside, and I'm like,
no, you put the hats on your head. It's hot outside, and hats go on.
That's
heads.
what I tell her, but that doesn't go over very well either. So
okay,
yeah, it's tough. And then of course when I correct her, because I'm the asshole. Then she'll say, "Oh, sorry, I meant to say hot, hot." So it's interesting to me that she carries some of that Pennsylvania from growing up than she does from the rest of the speak. And then I listen to my two boys; they're starting to sound a lot more Virginian to my ear.
I remember you saying that Zevi says something very Virginia-like.
He has wire. Zevi, go get your shoes. Wire. He always makes me think of Penelope Pitstop from Wacky Races. A wire.
Gosh, even I don't get that reference.
Do you remember Dastardly and Muttley?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so Penelope, so they're also from the Wacky Races. They just had a split-off show of their own.
Okay.
And then Penelope Pitstop.
Oh, okay. I
think Penelope Pitstop actually had a break-off show of herself. But yeah, they were all Hanna-Barbera cartoons.
Got it. I thought you were pulling out another Aunt Sally that, few people would get. But those that do get it are just pleased as punch that you've mentioned it.
Speaking of punch...
Oh?
That's the number one way rum was consumed in the United States in the 18th century.
Look at you dropping knowledge. Where did you get such knowledge to be dropped?
So you and I have made mention of looking into more rums for the nation.
Oh, yeah.
We've had success with rum at retail. We just launched our first rum to members of the nation, and it sold very, very well. Took 3-4 days to sell out.
Got that.
And so we're looking deeper into the rum category.
That we are.
And so given we've got our dear friend Dave Broom, who has been, it's so funny, right? We've been talking about Dave Broom championing rum since, in my mind, the number is 2003.
Yeah.
I just read in Rum, the Manual, written by Dave Broom, I want to say some point in the last 2 to 5 years. I'll have to double check that to be 100% certain. 1993 was the beginning of him saying, rum is coming, everybody get ready, rum is coming.
1993, 27 years ago, he said rum is coming.
Exactly. 1993.
I tell you, he would have made a terrible Paul Revere. That's like if Paul Revere were to cry wolf. I feel as if 1993 is crying wolf for rum, but it feels as if it is coming here finally.
But here's the other part for me is, at what point do we say Dave Broom was not correct? Right? Because to my mind, if you say it every 3 to 5 years for 30 years, I think there comes a point when we say even a broken clock is right twice a day.
But also, what does rum is coming mean? I mean, rum has been here for a long time and quite, used quite largely in, with cocktails. Like, it's a big mover. There's well rums and all sorts of, what does that mean? Rum is coming.
So here's the thing. If you look at the history of rum in the United States over the last 200 to 250 years, it has, just like my knowledge of the whiskey industry, it has had a series of peaks and troughs, and it has been in favor and it has been out of favor. And so the return to tiki, which I think is being a very, I saw the rise of tiki 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Tiki first came to this country in the 1930s, right? Hot off the heels of Prohibition, hot off the heels of Cuba, and Cuban rum being discovered by those who left the US Prohibition and went down to Cuba and had a wonderful, wonderful time. Tiki kind of came back with them. And so right now to say rum is coming, rum was here, it kind of went away a bit and then it came back in one form. For me, and I could be completely mistaken in thinking of it like this. For me, I'm looking at it where we talk about how omnipresent vodka was in the 80s and brown spirits were trying to battle against that. You had the creation of light whiskey, which American grain whiskey, which you and I have talked about many, many times. But then you contrast that with today, where you and I talk about from about 2006, plus or minus 2 years, you've got the beginning of the boom of Scotch whiskey, which then became global whiskey, which then became American craft whiskey, right? It's all whiskey all the time.
Yeah.
That's the champion. And so my take has been, given that all of that is cyclical, when will rum get its return to that extent? And that's a thing that I don't think we're close to. But as you and I upturn more and more stones, and you and I speak to more and more people who are as deep into rum as you and I are into whiskey, whiskey writ large, both with an E and without an E, you and I are starting to hear from them. Yeah, we're seeing an increase in demand. We're seeing an increase in people wanting to talk about this, an increase in people wanting to learn about this. And you and I are seeing it, and this was part of the Angostura release that we had for the nation. We're seeing bourbon drinkers who are more than happy dipping a toe into rum.
Yep, makes
You
sense.
and I are approaching single malt drinkers who are intrigued in dipping a toe into rum. You and I will have an episode coming up at some point in the future where we sit and talk to Richard Seal, 5th generation ownership at Foursquare. And Richard talks to us in that interview and talks to our listeners in that interview the way he talks to a whiskey audience.
Yeah.
So there's natural progression there, natural evolution there. And I think this boom that we've been a part of in whiskey, I think will incorporate rum and the rum world. And I think those who have been in rum and digging it, loving it, exploring it, like Mitch, who we'll talk to today, since 93 and 2003 and 2013, I think those folk are going to be excited to have that new audience walking through their door saying, tell me more. Tell me what you know about this. And I think that's very exciting. And so before I get too far away from kind of the answer I was giving you there, do you think it's a mistake for me to think about rum being where Scotch has been for the last 14, 15, 16 years? Do you think it's a mistake to expect rum to get where vodka was in the 80s? Do you yourself think there's a different way to measure rum arriving? Not just rum coming, but rum arriving.
I do believe that there's going to be a different way to measure it, because if you think about the Scotch whiskey boom, that was a focus on single malt, and so much so that it was at one time that 95% of the Scotch whiskey industry was all blends, 5% was single malt. And now it's more of a 90-10 split, right? So single malt has grown by leaps and bounds. And then that, I feel, extended, at least here in the U.S., to bourbon, right? Where bourbon was kind of the rot gut. Maybe you'd go into a mix like a Manhattan or an Old Fashioned or, something like that. But then all of a sudden people started drinking it straight like they would single malt. And I think with rum, because it is such an amazingly broad category that comes from dozens of countries, and you've got unaged rums and spiced rums and all this stuff, like, will those that drink single malt and bourbon convert to rum? Like, to me, rum arriving in the sense that Scotch whiskey or bourbon has arrived means that there's going to be more access to unadulterated rums that people are going to want to drink straight. And I don't know if it's going to get there. You know, a lot of people thought that Irish whiskey was going to boom, and it is booming. There's more distilleries being built. But the growth within Irish whiskey continues to be within blends and not necessarily within the pure malt, the pot still and the single malt categories. And when that really kicks off, that's when, at least in my mind, I will say Irish whiskey has arrived. And when that happens with rum, when people just want to drink it for what it is rather than mix it with something else, then, again, at least in my mind, that's when I'll say, okay, rum has arrived. And maybe I'm thinking about it the wrong way.
Yeah, maybe we both are. Maybe we both aren't. Maybe one of us will be proven right and one of us will be proven wrong. It's right now, it's that speculation surrounding it, right? And that is kind of fun for me. I just want to throw this in. We have a very knowledgeable audience who we thoroughly enjoy. If you, like me, like Joshua, if you want to know more about the rum category, I would recommend jumping in where I've just jumped in. I picked up Dave Broom's Rum, the manual, just on my Kindle, and it's $3.99. Like, if you just want a nice, easy, dip your toe in, get a sense of the industry, get a sense of the different styles of production, get a sense of the different regions, you know, clearly it scratches the surface, but it really does it in a way that I feel like I'm starting to equip myself. And if there's a part Dave doesn't cover in more detail, I know to go find another resource that'll be the deep dive into that. Yeah, and so if you just want to scratch the surface and just get a base understanding of the category, I do recommend Rum, the Manual by our friend Dave Broom. Before we jump over to Mitch, because I don't want you and I to sit and wax lyrical about rum more than we have, because Mitch is a fascinating interview here. But just another thing that I've got rumbling around in my brain, just as we talk about...
Rumbling?
Let's get ready to rumble!
Too easy. Geez, what was I going to say? Now my brain's gone empty. Rum had such a global presence and was consumed so readily before whiskey was even a category.
Right.
Right? And so the thought that this drink that you and I champion, that is, you know, from my homeland, wasn't even on a menu when brandy and cognac and wine and rum were the options of the day. Just rumbles around in my brain and just has me thinking, wow, we're the new kid on the block, going up to people saying like, hey, you ever heard of this? What's it called? Rum? You ever heard of this? Here, you want to try it? Like, oh my God, the audaciousness, the audacity of us is terrific. So there you go. That's rumbling around in my brain. Let's jump into it with Mitch, because I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation with him.
Yeah, and like you had said with Dave Broom and in his book, you know, Rum, the Manual, giving you a great primer on rum. I think Mitch does an amazing job as well and gives us a good bit of history, not just on the overall category of rum, but he represents a brand called Black Tot. And just, you know, full disclosure, full disclaimer here, Black Tot is a brand that Impex Beverages imports. I am an employee of Impex Beverages, so I just want everybody to know that we will be discussing Black Tot. This is not an infomercial for Black Tot, but rather, you know, the idea was to have a rum conversation. let's get a little bit of 101 in here. Let's get a little bit of history, but we also need to know about Black Tot as well because it's an integral part of the rum history.
Yeah, and just to kind of underline, you and I are always very careful to not fall into infomercial territory. Here's how terrible a job you did if this were to be an infomercial. My good friend and business partner did not send me a sample of Black Tot rum to enjoy during the interview with Mitch when we would ultimately start talking about Black Tot rum. So I was on the outside. I'm just like our dear listeners in listening to this interview. I also didn't have any Black Tot rum to enjoy. Wow. And that's just the way it is. Without further ado, here's Mitch and Joshua, and ultimately they'll be drinking Black Tot rum together.
So first off, Mitch, thank you for joining us. We really, really appreciate it. As you know, One Nation Under Whiskey it's a podcast that obviously, as the name tells you, focuses on whiskey. And so to talk about rum, we're kind of taking a detour from what we normally do. However, as independent bottlers, we've to date, bottled four or five rums, 5 rums right now. And what we found as we bottle more and more rum, many of our Scotch whiskey drinkers are starting to follow along, right? They're curious about dipping a toe into rum. I think bourbon drinkers have found perhaps an easier path to rum, and maybe Foursquare has been a bit of a gateway to them. There's so many similarities in flavor profiles from Foursquare rum to bourbon, certain keynotes that bourbon lovers look for. But I think there's a good number of people out there, whiskey drinkers, that are nervous to dip a toe into the world of rum. I was part of a Zoom tasting last week, and we were focusing on Japanese whiskey, and we started talking about rum, and I brought out a bottle of Black Tot, and I'm drinking that. And the guy we were speaking with says, I just don't know where to go with rum because everyone I've had has been way too sweet. Someone told me that, it may say 15 years old, but maybe it isn't 15 years old. And I don't like, Captain Morgan. Like, I don't want it spiced. And so it's difficult to point a whiskey drinker in the direction you think a whiskey drinker would want to go to, right? To a dry rum, to something that doesn't have sugar into it. And then, and this is it's a bit of a long setup here. And then the other aspect of rum is that, at least here in the U.S., it has been white rum that's made for cocktails and really nothing else. And then on your journey to the serious side of rum, which I think might be where whiskey lovers want to go, that's where they want their destination to be, there's tiki along the way, which is almost like, a bit more geeky rum, but it's silly and kind of fun. And then there's this weird tiki culture, which can be kind of unusual and confusing to people. And so with all that said, how do you, when you're talking to people within the whiskey world, how do you talk to them? How do you tell them that, the rum world is okay to visit and here's why?
Well, first of all, thanks very much for having me on, Josh and Jason. It's great to be at the first ever One Nation Under Rum. I think the name change is great, and I'm glad you've seen the light finally. No, it's I think I always think back to the first ever shift I did at a bar, and I was very lucky. It was a rum bar in London called Trailer Happiness, and I'd been trying to get a job there, and one day they said, okay, come in tomorrow, we're doing a stock take. You can come in for a couple of hours and help me with that. And on the back wall of Trailer, you've got about 300 rums, and he was calling out each rum and giving me the figures of how much rum was left in the bottle, and I was writing it all down. And most of almost all of those rums at that time I'd never heard of before. Half of them I'd never seen before or since, and half the places they were from I'd never come across before. I think it could be so hard when you first start off because it's a completely foreign world, it's completely foreign land, and you're trying to get your head around all of these places, and it's very, very tough to know where to start, and so anyone who's sort of, as you say, dipping their toe into the rum world, I completely empathize with that because I remember exactly how that felt. And it's almost like the only experience in my life I can relate it to outside of spirits is when I first started listening to Bob Dylan albums. And my friends like, you've got to listen to this Bob Dylan, it's amazing. I'm like, cool. And he plays Blonde on Blonde. I'm like, this is amazing. And then then he puts on Freewheeling. I'm like, oh, this is really cool too, but it's completely different. And then I'm going through all of Bob Dylan's albums being like, oh, just they must all be amazing. And then there's Christian rock and there's all these random ones, and I'm like, how the hell is this all the same person? How is this all the same? Like there's like 70 albums on here. Like, how do I know what to listen to first? And then you go like blood on the tracks. You're like, oh, I like that one, but how did right? And then you find another, and it's like this mountain where if you don't have a guide sort of show you which path to go up, you might try 100 rums which are awful before you find one that you love, and it's very, very tough when you're getting in because unlike I think the whiskey world, which has done such a wonderful job of educating people, even people who know nothing about whiskey, I'd say, oh, well, do you want to try a Scotch or an Irish whiskey or an American whiskey? And they'll have a basic understanding. They'll go, oh yeah, I think I'm going to like Scotch. I think I'm going to like this, whatever, like real basic stuff. In the rum world, if I said, what do you think you'd prefer, Barbados or Jamaican rum? No idea. I don't know. Well, it's all the Caribbean, isn't it? It's like, it doesn't have that same basic understanding for people from the offset. We've got to build that up, and we have to do a better job, I think, in the rum world of guiding people, of helping people through those first few hurdles, because otherwise, you pick up the wrong rum and you go, oh, this has got a pirate on it, it must be authentic, and now we've lost you.
So that was going to be the question I wanted to put in front of you is, even within the Scotch world or the single malt world, we understand the regions to be very general, not particularly accurate, but it's still a shorthand that a lot of us still return to just to paint Scotch with broad strokes. Highland, Lowland, Islay, world, where we now say, Irish, English, Welsh, Indian. Are there even broad strokes within rum, or are you still looking at, even if you're looking at Jamaica, even if you're looking at Barbados, there'll be one style of rum at this distillery, another style of rum at that distillery, or is there some kind of regionality to this, no matter how broad?
There are some regionalities which at least get you in the right ballpark. They at least get you in the right field. And I mean, you've got to remember, and for some people listening as well, you may have heard rum described as white, gold, and dark. I mean, what a shit way to describe spirits, right? Okay, like if that's where you're starting in your rum journey as white, gold, and dark, it would be the same as saying, I drink brown whiskey. What the hell does that mean? Like we're not. It's not like rum is like, oh, we're a little bit behind in our understanding. It's like no. We are really, really behind with some of the terminology and some of the things we do. And then after white, gold, and dark, the next thing people tend to learn is English, Spanish, French, as in sort of a basic understanding of what those islands are attached to colonial-wise, and what their original languages were, and that sort of tends to, we thought, oh, that kind of gives you a picture. English style would be bigger, heavier pot still styles. French style would be grassy agricoles. Spanish style would be solera and column still. And that's like, yeah, sometimes, but again, it's that would be the equivalent of saying, what kind of whiskey do you like? I like European whiskey. Okay, again, it's too broad a term. And then by the time we get down to individual islands and countries, that's where, okay, we can, yes, there may very well be differences between distilleries. There usually are. But generally there'll be more in common than not in common. There's at least a general idea that this island will make this style, and within that island those 4 distilleries will do this, and this. Some countries, some islands only have one distillery, so that that really narrows it down. But that distillery itself might make 20 different styles of rum within that one distillery as well. So even then it gets tricky, and we have to, again, like anything, you've got to get more and more specific. The more you understand, the more you learn about it, the more we can narrow down that conversation and be able to say exactly what you want. But yeah, the rum world for years was not very good at that, and I think hopefully we're starting to get a bit better. So
yeah, again, it just trying to lay down the groundwork for our listeners, but trying to fit the idea of rum within a whiskey mindset. When we think about Scotch whiskey or American whiskey, or even European whiskeys, there are certain guidelines put into place, right? Scotch Whisky Association has certain laws that say this is what a Scotch is, this is what blended Scotch is, this is what single malt Scotch is, and then there's bourbon, right? How much corn is in the mash bill? You're using new charred oak, so on and so forth. But again, we're putting these in the context of the regions where these are meant to be made, right? Scotch can only be made in Scotland, and therefore they can control what that production looks like. Bourbon can only be made in America. Again, they can control it. But when it comes to rum, it's made all around the world. And my understanding, and you and I have talked about this a little bit, Mitch, but my understanding is there's no unifying laws around rum because it's very difficult to unify 20, 30, 40, however many countries are making rum. Are there laws that I'm not thinking of? A, and B, are there any big players within the rum industry that are trying to put at least baseline rules in place to say, okay, this is what you can and cannot call rum?
So I guess my first thing on that would be, as you say, yes, there are lots of different rules for whiskey. But if I was to say to you guys, is there one rule for whiskey that everyone has to follow? Like, well, no, it's all regional. Yes, Scotch has its rules, bourbon has its rules. Each of these regions will have very clear guidelines, and rum, yes, again, just. There are a lot of countries that make rum. There are a lot of islands that make rum. But it would be interesting to see side by side, nowadays how many regions are making whiskey and all the local regulations for each of those as well, and see, what those numbers actually stack up by. Because I have trouble keeping up with you guys in the whiskey world. It's like, okay, what's going on now? Right, okay. So yes, there are local rules, and some of them are more enforced and more enforceable than others. And this is where it starts to get tricky, because you can have local traditions and customs, right? You can have this is how we've always made it, so this is just what we do. And we don't need a GI or an AOC or a whatever denomination to sort of say, okay, this is in writing because this is just how we do it. That said, there are some places in the rum world that absolutely do. So Martinique is probably the most famous example. They have an AOC, an Appellation d'Origine Contrôlée. Apologies to any French listeners, but that's their that's their rule list. You know, you can ferment to this ABV, you can ferment for this many hours, you can have this Brix content in your wash, you can only distill using column stills, you can only distill to these ABVs. Like, they're super specific, just as the French are with everything they make, you know, cognac, champagne. The French are amazing at putting rules in place. But then you've also got, you know, Venezuela has its own appellation as well, so you can only use locally harvested sugarcane molasses. You have a 2-year minimum age limit on all the rum. Like, they have a lot of rules there too. Okay. Cuba has a 2-year minimum age limit. Puerto Rico has a 1-year minimum age limit. I'm throwing out age limits there, which is actually more uncommon in rum. But there are lots of local rules, and lots of, as I say, some more codified than others. Now, the tricky part is you can have all the rules you like in the world, but then you need the rest of the world to obey those rules, you know? So, sure. You know, you hear those old stories about when cognac was protecting the name cognac, so you couldn't call it Hungarian cognac or Russian cognac, or it's like, no, cognac is just this region, just this place. That's, if it's not from here, it doesn't qualify. And the rum world's had difficulties with that in the past, you know. So, like, terms like agricole are protected in the EU, for example, but as far as I know, unless something's changed recently, it wasn't protected in America. So someone else could, you know, release an agricole not from Martinique or those surrounding islands there. And depending on which countries enforce the rules and which countries don't, that kind of weakens your trademark on that term. So there's a lot of different legislation to get through with that, and it's not always down to the rum producers themselves. Quite often it's down to the trade, the commerce, the relationships between those countries, and what can and can't reasonably be enforced. But in answer to the second part of your question, yes, absolutely, there is more of a movement in the rum world towards creating these GIs, these appellations. So, you know, for years there's been talks about creating this, or rather enforcing this, like, authentic Caribbean rum mark. There are people trying to enforce, you know, more local regulations. So, like, making sure the GI for Jamaica is a set clear list of rules. Barbados is the other famous example. There's a big tussle going on in Barbados over what the GI is going to be and how that's going to eventuate, you know, whether you can add sugar to rum or not add sugar to rum, and all of these other things. So yeah, people and producers are realizing the importance in having these GIs in place, and I think for the most part everyone wants them, but not everyone, of course, has the same ideas of what they want them to be.
And I'm sure you still want to preserve that regionality while having rules, regulations writ large in place. It's how do you find the wiggle room within that? And when someone comes out to say, we're going to write down regulations, it sounds terrible from the very beginning, and you don't get a lot of buy-in. So I could see the struggle in trying to implement such a thing. Question for you, since you're here, Mitch. If we're looking at flavor profiles, I had a wonderful experience where Christopher Grombeck, who runs and operates the Barrel Thief in Seattle, we talk about him a fair bit, we've interviewed him for the podcast. There was a night after a whiskey tasting where he and I were just talking about rum a little bit. He said, okay, let me do this for you. He pulls out 5 glasses, he puts 5 different rums in them, and we run the gamut from tire fire, nail polish, warm and chewy, a little bit spicy, a lot of tropical, as I go from glass to glass to glass. How do you articulate those styles to people, and what styles do you encounter as you explore this rum world?
Well, that's a tricky question. Yeah, it's It's very tough. There have been lots of different, I guess, sort of attempts at official categorizations of things. But in terms of the flavor profiles that you mentioned, it's it is tricky. We're very close with the Whisky Exchange over here in the UK, and they've sort of come up with a system on their website to help people with that kind of thing, because it is very hard to break it down, and you're like, well, what do I like? What's my favorite thing? So they've got lots of different terms. I'm going to be tested now because Dawn Davies, who came up with it all, is going to be listening to this and be like, make sure you got those flavor camps right. So here we are. I'll read out the 6 for you that they've got here. So you've got light and uncomplicated, which for me is the most passive aggressive of all the 6 flavor camps. It's basically the rums that taste like vodka and don't taste of anything.
Light and uncomplicated. That's brilliant.
Wow. I had a girlfriend like that once.
That's exactly why I said to Dawn, I was like, imagine going on a date with someone and, like, how are they? Oh, they're light and uncomplicated. Like, oh, that's not a good... You shouldn't describe anything like that. But anyway, light and uncomplicated. The vodkas of rums.
Where are they making light and uncomplicated whiskies? Light and uncomplicated rums.
You'll have to answer the whiskey question afterwards. But
yeah, Lowlands is an easy answer.
It's... Yeah, unfortunately, I'm reticent to sort of attach it to certain places because
makes sense.
The annoying thing is that a distillery can make any, like, if you've got a still, as you guys know, you can make amazing spirit or you can make very cheap spirit. It really depends on the brand and what they're looking to put out, and I don't feel it always represents or gives the best image to a certain island or country. But you get these places with multi-column stills that can make a rum distillate up to 96%, and when you're distilling to that kind of level, you're not really you're not bringing through any of the congeners, you're not bringing through any of the flavor, and it is pretty close to vodka, and they'll water it down and they might add color to it and spices to it, and that might be the base for a spiced rum or something like that. But as soon as you're distilling that high and it's that mass produced, you might as well, you could use pretty much anything for the base, so
sure. Gotcha. Yep.
So
yep. Sounds like Scottish grain whiskey, American grain whiskey.
So yeah, so I mean, if you ever try a rum, and again, not that the term's great, but a lot of people will try a white rum, and they'll go, oh, this has got no flavour to it, and it really depends what white rum you're having. If you're having a rum that's been aged, filtered, or whatever, and just sort of stripped down to its lowest ABV, then yeah, it might not have that much flavour to it. But then if you're trying a white rum like Rare Nephew, which is unaged, overproof, 63% from Jamaica, pot and column blend, whew, you're having a party. It's a completely different experience. So, which is again where this whole idea of colour breaks it down. It breaks down completely. You can't use that. You have to be specific. What is this? Is this a multi-column still, charcoal filtered, 96% distillate, watered down to fuck? Then, well, yeah, okay, that's going to taste like vodka, of course.
Yeah.
So light and uncomplicated rums, there's a few out there, but if you've ever had a boring rum, that would be the category for that one. Herbaceous and grassy, as I say, the agricoles, Clarence from Haiti, beautiful, grassy, tastes like sugarcane, fermented and distilled. Tropical and fruity is another category they have on here. So this is like your, I always think of this as like your Barbados rums, some of your Jamaican rums. You get Barbados for me is like the pina colada of rums. It's pineapples, coconuts, vanilla. You get all those. If you're picturing yourself drinking a rum and lying on a beach somewhere with your coconut, you're probably drinking Barbados rum. It's beautiful. Jamaica is a lot more intense. It's still those fruit flavors, but it tends to be a bit more ripe, a bit more pungent, a bit more. A bit more forward. So the Jamaican fruity, still tropical, but just sort of on the other end of the spectrum of that category,
Okay.
Then they have another one for fruity and spicy. So this is where, you do, and not as in spiced rum, but just you can, again, I think of Jamaican rums doing this very well. You get some of those spicier notes coming through, those that cinnamon, that allspice kind of flavor starting to come through in the rum. Dry and spicy is another category they use, and then rich and treacly again for your bigger, sweeter, richer rums as well. So that's how they break it down. That I think helps people get at least in the right ballpark to start with.
And that's what strikes me about it, and I think that was the success of the regionality with whiskey is it didn't need to be 100% correct all of the time. It just needed to be a starting point that would give those who were interested in exploring whiskey a common language.
Yeah.
And so even though you point out here these terms are general, it's not always going to fit every distillery within every region, but it's a starting point. And it allows me to sit down of an evening and say, okay, I'm going to go through 5 or 6 rums and I'm going to explore these flavor profiles. Now I feel equipped to jump off and conduct my own research and look into production. Or now speak to another rum drinker and say, oh, hey, I had this light and inconsequential. I'm riffing off the first profile. But what a beginning! Like what a story to begin telling. And so I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad there is a jumping off point, even if it's not ideal. So
I want to switch gears here a little bit, if you wouldn't mind. I do want to return, however, to flavor in a little bit, but one of the other reasons that we're desperate to have you on the podcast is you're such a great storyteller. I'm sure you've got many stories to tell, but specifically to the history of Black Tot rum, right? Which is the brand that you're with. And here in the U.S., we will have, if anybody's perused their various liquor shops and maybe looked in the glass cabinet, they will have seen, Black Tot last consignment for well over $1,000, and wondering how could a rum be well over $1,000? None of this makes sense. What is a tot anyway, and why is said tot black? It just we didn't really fully understand it, but it's been your job for a while now to teach people the history of Black Tot, what Black Tot Day is, and now you're part of the team that's sort of reintroduced this brand of Black Tot, and it's launching globally. So I wonder if you can talk a bit about your brand and the history of it.
Absolutely. It's funny you mentioned the glass cabinet. Actually, someone sent me a link the other day. I don't know if you've ever watched Trailer Park Boys. It's a show on Netflix, and season 2, episode 10, the last one in the season, they go to this bottle store and they get this bottle of Black Tot out of the glass cabinet, and it's like we were completely shocked. We were like, wow, okay, so we need to if they're listening, we need to send you some rum to say thank you. But
wow, that's fantastic.
We're like, oh, we feel we feel a lot of love. But yeah, it's you're right. It is one of those rums that for years it's had a bit of mystery around it, and now we're sort of ramping it up, and I joined the team at the start of this year to help share that story, because it's a phenomenal backstory, and it's one of the most incredible rums in the world. Like this, there really is nothing out there that I found that has the history that this rum has to it. So to take this back a bit, I guess we have to go to back about 300 years, where
that's a Joshua level backing it up. That's pro level. Well done.
That's serious.
How long does this podcast go? We settle in.
We've had 3-hour episodes.
Take all the time.
So at sea, everything starts at sea with our story of Black Tot. And life at sea 300 years ago was shit. Like, it was horrible, and you didn't want to be on that boat, you know, with in the conditions you were in. And there were lots of different challenges that various, you know, navies and merchants and privateers and stuff had. One of those challenges was how to have enough water for the voyage. And part of the issue with that was, you know, the only way you could transport anything was in barrels. Barrels were, in this sense, purely a transportation device. No one's, you know, caring about, well, let's age our whiskies and rums and stuff like that. It's like, no, the barrel, we can roll the barrel, we can store a lot of stuff in it, we can put it on the ship, and it will survive the voyage. So if you fill that barrel with water in the 1600s, one, that water's probably not clean. It's not like filtered water we have today. You know, you've probably got some disease in the water already. Two, if you put it in a barrel, it's only going to last maximum of 2-3 weeks before you start getting algae on it and stuff growing in it, and all that water's gone off and stale and horrible. And what they understood even back then was just if you had something alcoholic, the alcohol would keep it better for longer. So rather than take, you know, coming from England, say, rather than take we would still take water, but you would also take beer, because we were a beer country, and even a light beer with a little bit of alcohol in it would keep it, you know, hopefully for the duration of your trip. Okay. And you could drink that, and the daily ration for sailors every day was 8 pints of beer a day. That's imperial pints, not US pints, so they're like the big ones. And so that was about
20 ounces.
Yeah, so a gallon of beer every day was the ration, and that's how you stayed hydrated, and you drank that. And if you went on a short voyage or a smaller trip, you'd get a lower strength beer. And if you were going on a longer voyage, they were meant to give you a higher strength beer, because the higher strength would help keep it for longer.
Makes sense.
Now, bear in mind, depending on the size of your crew, a gallon per day per crew member, that's a lot of beer, a lot of cargo that you're carrying on ship anyway. Also, it wouldn't necessarily have tasted the best either, especially, you know, that beer would still go off and go stale at some point on the trip, so it's probably going to be pretty rank by the time you got to wherever you were going. So you were constantly trying to pick up other things along the way, and wherever you could go to a port, restock, refill, refresh things, you would. Yeah. Also, you know, the officers, the higher end serving at that time, were still allowed to drink, so they would have gin, cognac, brandy, other spirits. Whiskey at this stage is still, you know, we're talking about early 1600s. It's just sort of coming onto that. It's not really a thing. Yeah. Not really a thing yet, you know. So whiskey at this stage doesn't really get a look in. But around this time, the 1600s, is where we start to go to the Caribbean, and all the European navies are going to the Caribbean and the Americas, and they're, you know, all tussling for land over there. Now, getting there is one thing, and then having a spirit to bring back is another thing, you know. And each of these navies would have different things. So the Portuguese, you know, they'd have ports, you'd have different ones of sherry, you'd have gin, you'd have cognac. As so we would try not to buy cognac wherever we could, because we were often fighting the French. So but people loved it so much, we might go to like a third party, a neutral ground, and we buy it off them, just so we don't actually have to hand the French any money, you know. And then the first time we ever see rum come on the map in this sense, in the Navy sense, is in 1655. So the Spanish, who'd been ruling Jamaica for 100 years or so, England came along. We took Jamaica off the Spanish, and at the end, to celebrate this, it was like a month-long battle to get the island from the Spanish. And at the end, we all had this tot of rum to celebrate. It was like everyone was issued a ration of rum. So 1655 is the first recording we have of this rum ration being dished out in the British Navy.
Okay.
For the next 80 or so years, it really carries on as just drink whatever you can find, various things on ships and all things on ships, where beer, gin, cognac, and now rum starting to be introduced, especially for the voyages back. Then in 1731, you get the first codified set of Navy rules, because before then it was really whatever you want to do, you just trusted them to do the right thing out there. So they were like, maybe we should have a set of guidelines for this. So 1731, they write the Navy rules, and as part of that, they say, you can have the beer ration still, or you can, if that's not available, you can have a half pint of overproof rum, or any spirit, but rum comes into the thing. Now, half a pint, I don't know if you've ever had half a pint of overproof rum, but that's a pretty fun night. And trying to run an entire crew that's all on a half pint of overproof rum every day, it didn't last very long. So they quickly halved that to a quarter pint. They then halved that again to an eighth of a pint, and watered it down to call it what became known as grog. So this was watered down rum basically on the ships, and that tradition then carried on from when they started it. You got your rum ration in the morning, say around 11 a.m. Got another one around dusk kind of time. And that tradition of getting your daily tots lasted for 239 years.
Wow.
It was in there. It was, people look forward to it every day. It was part of your, it was part of your daily routine. It was something you really looked forward to as a sailor. Interestingly, as I know this, most of our listeners will be in the States, the US Navy rejected this quite early on. It was quite, from 1862, you guys were like, no, we're not giving spirits to anyone. I know you guys have always led the charge on temperance and prohibition, and
yeah, we've always been oddly prudish, even back then, I guess.
You just love the moral high ground, I guess. But yeah, it's you guys killed off the rum rations pretty early doors, and yeah, so which is why it might be a bit of a foreign concept, to those of you listening in the States. So. But yeah, we carried on with it. We carried on and we carried that tradition on up until 1970. Bear in mind, we invented nuclear submarines in 1958. So for 12 years, we had big red buttons and nukes. And we were like, should we still give out the rum? And the answer was yes.
Holy crap.
So for 12 years we argued over it, and for much longer, like there was lots of people who thought, it didn't fit, because the technology was changing. You've got to think about when this first started in the 1700s, it's wooden sailing ships. It's the real Wild West, it's not like what you would imagine a modern military navy to be like today. So by the time it got to 1970, it was a little bit out of date, a little bit antiquated, and they decided it was best with all the new tech on board that maybe we shouldn't have these submarines and everyone being half cut on the on the ships. So
wow. Okay.
31st of July 1970 was the last ever rum ration that was given out, and they called it Black Tot Day. They had a funeral for the rum. It was like they'd lost their favourite crewmate. And
wow.
They all wore black armbands, and some of the naval colleges held mock funerals and processions for this rum, and they were really gutted about it. It was a real a real sad day.
Are there any reports, or is there any history of a push to get the Royal Navy to change their mind about ending the tot?
So there was a big debate in Parliament about it. So you can actually look up the transcripts of it, and there was plenty of people who were on the side of the rum. They said, no, this is important for the morale. This is tradition. This is life at sea is still hard. They still need something to raise their spirits and keep them going and stuff. And it's because you might be on the tour for. We think of most voyages being, it'd be a short voyage or whatever, but some of these campaigns would last, they might be at sea for 2 years before they came back home. So, having things that kept their spirits up, that kept them motivated was so important. We actually, just last week, we interviewed a gentleman who, his name's John Hume, and he gave out the rum rations from 1961 till 1970. So he was there firsthand dishing out the rum, and he was sharing some of his stories. You can check it out on our Black Tot page. But it was incredible, like hearing it firsthand what the rum meant to them and how the extent they would go to make sure they got their rum or get a little bit extra rum whenever they could.
Wow.
It's a real highlight of the day.
I imagine that a rum ration might be used as currency as well on some of these ships. Is there any talk of that where people might say, you know what, I'm gonna give someone else my morning's ration to get X? Do you hear any? Have you heard any of that?
Yeah, absolutely. John had a lot of really good stories about that. From. It would cover everything from, you might give the chef a little bit of your rum to get some extra food in return. If you wanted someone to do a favor for you, you'd give them some rum. If you wanted someone to cover your shift, you could give them your tot, and people would cover you if you wanted to stay out late or do whatever. If they had a common one, an interesting one actually was shore leave. So if they actually had some time at a base to go out and get on land, they had a lot of the crew. He was saying, you'd have people going, I want to go and see this girl, or I want to go and, catch up with my wife or whatever. I haven't seen anyone for 6 months. Let's go. And they'd give you your tots of rum or their tots of rum to you to be like, can you cover my shift? Because I want to go and spend some more time with my partner.
Oh, wow. So, okay.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. So all of this history, right? 239 years of the Royal Navy rationing out rum to the sailors. It ends July 31st, 1970. How does all of this history relate to that actual bottling of Black Tot last consignment? Like what's in that? Where did that come from?
That's a very good question, and it's one we're still researching, to be honest. There's I think the perception of Navy rum today is often it's quite simple. It's Trinidad or Guyanese rum. It's dark. It's sweet. Yeah. It's nothing much to it. But that isn't actually how that rum came about at all, and the more we delve into the blend and we find the records of the rums they bought and blended into this blend for the Navy, it's quite incredible and quite a few surprises in that mix. We came onto the scene. How our story started was would have been almost 15 years ago now. An ex-sailor came to Sukhinder Singh, who owns Whisky Exchange here in the UK, and he had 2 flagons, which were these like stone ceramic jars that held about 4.5 litres of rum. They covered in wicker, had a little red wax seal on the top with a date on it. And he came to Sukhinder with these 2 flagons, said, I've got 2 Navy rum flagons. Would you like to buy them from me? And Sukhinder at that time hadn't seen them before. He said, yeah, okay. And so he bought the 2 flagons off him. The sailor told a friend who had another old boy in the Navy, had 5 Navy rum flagons. He brought those along. Sukhinder bought those 2. And then they told another mate who had 10 flagons. And at that point, he was like, okay, hold on. You must be getting this rum from somewhere. where's the source, you know? So Ken started doing this research. He started calling up, you know, the first port of call was obviously to contact the Navy and say, right, where is this rum? Because you must have had some left over, you know, you stopped it in 1970 and the vote to stop it all occurred within 3 days. Like they had the vote on the 28th of July. 3 days later, they had the last tot. So, and at any one time, they were blending about 4 million gallons of rum for the Navy over, you know, at different times. God. We think that scaled back a little bit by the time towards the end, but you know they had a huge quantity of rum on hand, and they were creating one of the world's biggest rum blends at the time. You know, they were the biggest customer to a lot of distilleries in the Caribbean. So
Sure.
So if they had all this rum and then suddenly they stopped it, where did that rum go? And it took Sukhinder about 3 years to find it all, because the Navy themselves had actually got rid of most of it. You know, they'd put it into these stone jars, these flagons. They'd sealed it all up. They'd put it into these warehouses. But where all the old docks were on the River Thames is like prime real estate in London now. So, of course, the time came where it's like, well, we could probably store stuff somewhere else, and we probably don't need all of this stuff anymore anyway. So warehouses were shut down and sold. Stock was moved along and sold off or given away or whatever it was. We know they kept some of the rum. So if you ever see, you know, some of the royal weddings or state occasions, occasionally you'll see one of these flagons come out, and they're using it as tots for that. But especially if the person from the royal family or whatever was in the Navy, they'll often use rum as their tot. But the rest kind of went missing, and it took a few years to track it all down. Some of it had actually ended up in the States, some of it was in Europe, and Sukhinder basically went around tracking all the people who had sold these rums on, finding where it all gone around the world, and then bringing it all back. And we now basically have this like little stash of Navy rum flagons up in our warehouse in Scotland, and you know, a portion of those were bottled to make Black Tot last consignment, and we put them all together and bottled that about 10 years ago. And we still have some flagons on hand as well, which I'm excited to see what we do with. But yeah,
that's remarkable.
It's incredible, you know. And this rum that went into last consignment, these flagons, you know, you can't recreate it today. This is the crazy part, because to give you some backstory on the Navy rum blend, they built these blending vats in London. They were blending, as I say, about 4 million gallons of rum. They were getting rum from lots of distilleries which today have closed down and are demolished. All of the casks would have been shipped at sea, aging at sea, no plastic containers back then, so everything's getting that dynamic aging or aging at sea, however you want to call it. Blended in, as say, these giant open wooden vats, so you would have had tremendous angel share. Even in London, you know, the angel share of these vats would have been almost 10% a year, you know, because so much was evaporating off. The vats caught fire twice. So there's a great story where the top of these vats were just all on fire and this rum's burning off. It was like the ultimate tiki bar, right? And like all this rum's burning off. And they sent the fire brigade in to put out the fires, and it took them a week. And the first few days they had to keep switching people out because the fumes were just making all of the fire brigade drunk. So they had to they couldn't stay in there for very long, and had to find different ways of actually like filtering out all these fumes. So yeah, this rum's seen some history. It's seen some pretty crazy days, and yeah, we even if we tried to make something like it would never be the same. It would never have that complexity. You know, that blend was continuously being topped up for over, you know, from the early 1800s to pretty much near the end of 1970. So for over 100 years, you're just continuously adding like this, like the ultimate mother broth of rum, you know, just completely adding to it.
So in that Black Tot the last consignment in the rum in all of those flagons, because you're just continually topping off and never really getting to the bottom of your vat, there could be rums that are 200-ish years old mixed in with some younger stuff in there as well.
Well, absolutely. And I guess you've got to look at, and again, we try to be very open with how that blending process works, and depending on how you see that blend and how much you think is new rum and old rum. But yeah, we reckon it's around 1804 they first built the vats, and it would have been sometime just before 1970 where they sort of started deconstructing and taking it off. So yeah, almost 170 years continuously blending, and the vats were designed with that intention in mind to keep part of the rum in. So a third of the way up the vat, you had a pipe connecting these three vats together. So like if you imagine like a line arm connecting, one vat to vat 2 to vat 3. So the rum could flow between the three vats. So it didn't matter which one you topped up. But because the pipe was a third of the way up, there was always a base reserve of rum at the bottom of these vats that you could never draw off past that point. So they were designed to be continuously added, and the old blends would always be influencing the newer rums added to it.
So first off, thank you for all that. That is such fun history. It's wild history, and I don't think there's really nothing like it in any other spirits world. It's truly its own history, which is super fun. So now we're fast forwarding to 2019, 2020, and now there's a new Black Tot coming out, and our friend Ollie Chilton, who's been on the podcast before, and he's the master blender for Port Ascaig. He does the selections for Single Malts of Scotland and some other brands. He, a whiskey guy, was charged with blending a rum to go under the Black Tot label. And now this is what I have in my glass. Actually, I need to refill my glass because it's just too damn drinkable. But could you talk a bit about the new Black Tot, which is very different, I think, from Black Tot last consignment, and I think in a good way. They're two very different rums, and I think that the newer one kind of fits my palate a little more. It's a bit more vibrant. It's less sort of oak influenced and relaxed and heavy. There's a brightness to it, which I quite love.
There's fewer 150-year-old rums in it.
Yeah, fewer 150-year-old rum. But I wonder if you could talk about the design of that rum and the aim for it.
Absolutely. So the conversation started, I suppose, after the last consignment came out, and for anyone who's tried it, it's a little bit of history. But as I say, it would be impossible today with today's production methods and the distilleries we have available to us and just everything about how that works. It would be impossible to recreate that rum and do it, and to do it justice. We could get something close, but to really do it the service it deserves, we just don't think it's possible. And so, of course, the conversation came up pretty quickly. Well, what do you do when the last consignment runs out? What do we do when there are no more flagons, when there are no more rums? And pretty quickly the idea came about, well, we should probably start a new blend. We should start again. We should sort of hit reset. If the Navy's not going to do a blend, we'll do a blend. So how do we do that? How do we start? And they spent a lot of time doing it. As I say, our last release with Last Consignment was 10 years ago. We had one release about 5 years ago of some 40-year-old Demerara rum from Guyana that we found.
I've had that. It's delicious.
There's less than 300 bottles in the world of that. That's even crazy. rare and expensive, So it's been a long time since we'd actually released anything, and the idea of actually creating something and making something that we were able to sustain and keep going and keep evolving ourselves was really the vision for it. And how to do that and how to do it honor and whether to make that under the Black Tot name, because obviously Black Tot has so much history, so then to add a new one to the range is it's quite ballsy, it's quite you've got to be really confident about what you're putting in that bottle to carry on the name. So they spent a lot of time with it and workshop different ideas, how they wanted to taste it. And as you say, Ollie's a whiskey blender and a whiskey drinker, first and foremost. Whiskey is easily his first passion, as rum is for me. It's like and
don't tell his wife that.
Yeah. Second passion. And with Sukinder too, it's called the Whisky Exchange for a reason. I keep trying to get him to change the name to Rum Exchange as well, but it's sticking by it. So as whiskey drinkers, their biggest thing was like, well, we want a rum that is bigger, ballsier, more texturally complete. We don't want anything thin. We don't want the light and uncomplicated. We want something that, as a whiskey drinker, we would appreciate. And they played around with the blend for quite a long time. So it was once they actually started making the blend, it took them just over 2 years to actually settle on the blend of rums that they wanted. Amazing. They had 26 different iterations of it before they finally said, okay, this is the one. And even now, you'll hear them talking, they're like, well, maybe we could, adjust this a bit or adjust that a bit. Like they're just perfectionists, So, but yes, in the end, the bottle that we have, the Black Tot Finest Caribbean, end up being a blend of four different component rums, from 3 different countries. So Barbados, 2 rums from Guyana, and then 1 rum from Jamaica in there as well. And it's good because each of those components brings a different thing to the mix. So the Barbados component is very fruity, tropical, all those fruits we were talking about earlier. That's your pina colada. You've got the two Guyanese rums, which kind of hit different ends of the spectrum of sort of a more bitter, licorice, darker sort of cacao notes, and then at the top end you've got these rich, chocolatey, sweeter notes, and those 2 rums together do a quite good job of giving you this overall sort of chocolatey feel. And then the Jamaica rum. Jamaica's an interesting choice, and one that you won't see in a lot of Navy rum blends, because the original Navy actually cut Jamaica from the blend from the late 1800s, because they said Jamaica is too pungent, it's too intense, it's too flavorful, like all those high esters, that like burnt rubber, that tire fire smell that you were talking about before. It was overpowering the rest of the blend, it's and you only need a touch of Jamaica sometimes and it can just it takes over, so we've reintroduced that Jamaica into our blend here, because people are getting into those more intense funky flavors, in the rum world. All the rum geeks are like, yeah, give me, it's like a ppm in whiskey. I want the smokiest thing ever, it's like, no, I want the funkiest thing ever. I want to be crying when I drink my rum, and they
like hops and IPA beers.
Yeah, exactly. Those we all know those people, or some of us are those people. It's like I always talk about, I've got this friend in Amsterdam, Chris, who runs the Rum Symposium over in Amsterdam, and he pulled out this Velier bottling of Tekka from Long Pond in Jamaica, which is like, basically in Jamaica you can have anywhere from 0 to 1600 esters. That's your ballpark, because 1600 is the legal limit for export. Okay, so 0 to 1600, and of course this is like 1600 ester rum. And he's like, try this, I try it, and it's it's great, but it's like rocket fuel. It's like so intense, so full on. And we were having just this nice, easy night. And I'm like, oh, come on. And he's like, oh, isn't it beautiful? Isn't it wonderful? And I'm like, surely not. Like, come on. You like, he's like, oh, yes, pours himself another. And I'm like, okay.
He's
Chris
what's
is
known
that
as
guy.
a fetishist. He's a fetishist.
Loves the funk, you know. It's like, yeah, it's quite something to behold.
But the quantity in Black Tot is just enough to be interesting without ruining the parade.
Yeah, we hope so. So we've this is something really cool that I'm really proud of. We're doing in Black Tot, which I haven't seen it done in any other rum in the world. But we're giving breakdowns of all our percentages and our blends and like
Yes.
putting down exactly what component and how much and everything in. So. We'll be putting all this up. We're redoing all the website and stuff at the moment, but all that information will be on there and hopefully on the labels soon as well. But yeah, so the Barbados makes up 35% of the blend. The two Guyanese together make up 60%, and then the Jamaica is just a little 5% at the end. So it's just a touch, but hopefully enough to make it interesting without, as you say, you know, setting fire to the whole thing.
What I love too about that breakdown is you also mention age and the fact that one of them is unaged. Is it the Jamaican or the Guyanese? One of the Guyanese rums.
Yeah, so we've got 20. So the Guyana, as I say, makes up 60% of the overall blend, and that's 40% is an aged 3 to 5 year old Guyanese rum, and then 20% is unaged Guyanese rum, and that's the one that gives you that bitter licorice kind of cacao note that I was mentioning before. So, and it's really interesting because one of the things we're going to do when we're able to travel again and do all this in real life is we're going to have these masterclasses and I'm going to bring the components out for people so people can try each of the 4 component rums and then the final blend as well, and you can see for yourself. So if you're just getting into rum, it will give you an idea of, okay, this is what Barbados, Guyana and Jamaica taste like. I can understand the difference between those 3 countries, and this is what it tastes like together. But if you're a complete rum nerd, you'll get to try this blend that's been deconstructed, which normally you'll get some bullshit from a brand like, oh, it's a secret recipe, and oh, we can't tell you what's in it, and we swam to a distillery somewhere and found this barrel, and it's filled with unicorn tears, and it's like, no, why don't we actually just tell you what's in the rum and how we put it together and why, and that seems I don't know, for me it's like watching these chefs on TV. You watch, I don't know, Gordon Ramsay or someone on TV, and it's like, oh, he's giving you his recipe. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, you've got a long way to go before you become Gordon Ramsay. You might be able to kind of copy it or do an okay job, but like, we'd rather tell you what's in the rum so you can appreciate the rum rather than all smoke and mirrors and then, I just hope you like it.
100%. It's been one of the interesting parts of the rise of craft brewers in the United States is those who kind of took off first have been quite happy to share mash bills, quite happy to talk about the yeast, because they say, like, we know what it takes to put this together. You're not just going to go out and do this yourself. And so it's nice to see that attitude come to rum as well. And of course, somebody we talk about all the time, John Glazer with Compass Box, where you can go to John's website, Compass Box's website, and see the breakdowns, because you're not going to go out tomorrow and create Compass Box. It ain't happening. So why not share the information where you can and when you can?
Yeah, no, it's I'm really excited. We actually had a label leak, well, not leak, but a label approved by the TTB the other day for the 50th anniversary blend that we've done. And this was the first thing. So Ollie and I went back and forth for hours on this label because, I was like, let's put all the information on it. It's like, maybe, okay. We worked it up together and we were like, what information can we squeeze on the label? What can't we? Whatever. And we were like, we both had things we wanted on there. And in the end, it ends up being like, I mean, this label, it's it's a lot going on that label, and if you can obviously look it up online. And a friend of mine, Matt Petrek from Cocktail Wonk, shared the label because he scours the TTB, and he's that guy in rum who's like, here's something new coming out, like put it out first. And he shared the label, and I'm going like, we were going to announce this on Black Tot. Okay.
Yep.
And but yeah, I should have clicked it was going to happen. But then the response online has just been phenomenal. Like just seeing people sharing it, going like, wow, like this is what transparency looks like, and everything I hoped it would communicate, I think it has, and hopefully people hopefully people can pick up a bottle of Black Tot, and especially that one when it comes out, and go, okay, these guys really want to, it's no smoke and mirrors, which is the normal the normal standard in the rum industry. It's like, no, let's tell you exactly what's going on in there. So I'm excited that we're taking the brand in that direction, and that we're able to do it, because it's hard with rums like Last Consignment. We're trying to find out all that information. We're trying to find the old records of what rums they bought and where the countries where it came from, and put that information back together retrospectively. And I think it would be so exciting for the things we're creating to be able to say, no, this is what we put in it and why.
But I like the fact that level of transparency brings us full circle from where we started our conversation, just on rum writ large. And if you want to release a blend, you've got two choices. Number one, you can come out and say, here's a blend, we're not going to tell you anything about it, buy it and enjoy it. Or you can take the approach that you have done, which is, okay, let's roll up our sleeves. Let's get to the business of education. For those who want to learn, come on in. And it's a much bigger proposition in front of you. But clearly, you're an engaged, passionate rum advocate, and you're clearly ready, and have been doing so, rolling up your sleeves and getting to work on the business of rum education. And I commend you.
That's why we wear tiki shirts, because our sleeves are already rolled up. We're ready to roll.
Power to you. Do we have another thing to get out of here, Josh, or more questions? Or
I've got one last question for you. Your project aside, right? Black Tot aside, what about the rum world in general has got you excited? What are you looking toward in rum?
Oh, good question. I'm hoping that the rum world comes together, really, because I think we've got something unique that is very different to all other spirits. I think we've got, we have a very different history, a very, very different culture with it. We've got a very different background, a very different story to tell from a lot of other spirits. And I haven't seen a spirit in my time in the bar world that's gone from being such an afterthought to being something so prestigious, or with the potential for that prestige. Something that's really gone from, this is just something spiced rum, cheap, nasty, whatever, to being like, wow, we've got all of these incredible bottlings, these Velliers, these, all Four Squares, all these different things, Black Tot, all these different companies putting out these top end rums, which are, you guys have been doing this podcast for 3 years, and now suddenly, we're doing a rum podcast. It's like something is changing. There's a different conversation happening.
Yeah.
And I think the more and more the whiskey lovers notice that, the better it is for the rum industry. And I think we have to be careful as an industry. I think it's very, because we have so much diversity, because we have so much freedom in some things, like everyone right now that rum is sort of starting to get a little bit of the spotlight, and trying to take some of that way, a lot of people are vying for position and trying to make rum this way or that way, or like, this is how rum should be, or rum can only be this, or whatever it is. And I think what I really hope for the rum world is that we go, okay, we keep that diversity, we keep that variety out there, Yes, we know there'll always be great producers and there'll be shitty producers and mass-produced ones or whatever, but ultimately that diversity, that variety is something very, very special in the rum world, and I hope that we sort of bring it together and we realize that, you know, another rum isn't our competitor, you know, another rum isn't against us. It's like, no, whiskey is our competitor, gin's our competitor, you know, bloody vodka's our competitor. Rum still has a long way to go before we're center stage. You know, right now we're getting on the credits, but we're the supporting act here. We want, you know, I'd love to see rum come into its own and come in a big way and really, you know, impress some people. I want, you know, your listeners who probably have some absolutely outstanding whiskies on their back bar to have a few extra rums up there, you know, and go, okay,
yeah.
Because I mean, it's incredible. I look at what you guys buy in whiskey, and for the same price in rum, you can have you'd have a back bar, you know, 2 or 3 times the size at least, and you'd have some amazing stuff in there. So it's a great time to get into rum. You know, obviously I really want us to be a part of that and really lead the charge with, you know, my goal is for us to be the most transparent rum we can and rum blend that we can. But also I really see us as, you know, the whole ethos behind the Navy blend was using rums from all different countries, bring it all together. It was, you know, it was a world blend. And I hope with Black Tot, you know, we can sort of carry that on in our new blends and really work with lots of different distilleries and countries, and you know, I see our job as sort of bringing the world of rum together in our blends, but also in the way we talk about rum and the way we excite people about rum. So it's I'm very excited for myself that I'm in a position where I can talk about all different countries and regions, because those are regions we might use in our blend rather than being locked to just one particular island and just, well, that's how we do it, so everyone else is whatever, you know.
But what's fascinating about listening to you today, Mitch, is you're making me think of Holly Sidewand, who we just posted an interview with Holly just a couple of months ago or a few months ago, where Holly is a brand ambassador for the Bacardi single malt distilleries. Right. But when Holly walks into a bar, a training, an education, what have you, she's talking about the world of whiskey. And you can't just understand the 5 Bacardi distilleries, single malt distilleries, in a nutshell. You have to talk about the entire category. And to hear you saying exactly that about rum and what you're excited for going forward with rum makes me very happy and very excited to champion you. And we mention Holly's name all the time, as I'm doing right now. But now to be mentioning Mitch's name going forward as well for those who are getting into rum. And I'm sure we'll speak to you again on the podcast and see where that world of rum is going. And last thing I want to say is just an observation that Josh and I were discussing internally and on an episode of the podcast at some point in the recent past, is we put an Angostura rum up for sale on our website. And whereas our single malt scotchies, our single malts writ large, are selling out in 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 10 minutes, our Angostura took a whole weekend to sell out, right? And it was really interesting because in looking back within the history of our company, we observed with that Angostura what we'd observed 2 and 3 years prior. That's where our single malts were 2 and 3 years ago. And that's when our company was really ramping up. And we thought, oh gosh, we sold that out in a weekend. Gosh, we're going places. Now we look at the rum and compared to single malt, whoa, that was a slow burner. In the grand scheme of things, holy moly, is rum starting to go places. Yeah. And we are hearing from bourbon drinkers that they're naturally taking to rum. We're hearing from single malt drinkers. They're looking to see what they'll get bang for their buck, right? And there is quality, there is bargains, right, to be had within rum right now. And so whereas we spoke to Dave Broom around this time last year, May of last year, and Dave Broom has been saying for years, rum is coming, rum is coming, rum is coming, rum is coming, and firmly believes that it might not happen. But if he just keeps saying it long enough, it might just happen. It's great hearing that rum might be about to get that day. And as you talk about the hope for what comes next for rum, I'm hoping it dovetails with what Dave Broom has been saying now for a decade and a half, 2 decades, because it is a fantastic category. If we can give people a foothold within it, I think they'll take off running. But we need to get them that foothold. And so, yeah, good luck to you, Mitch, in establishing that foothold. And let's get the hordes into rum, and let's get it a rocking category.
Yes. Well, thank you, and thank you very much for the kind words, Jason. But also thank you for giving us a platform to talk with your listeners. Because I think, it's that. I think that will be the trick. I think as much as our little rum bubble is nice and it's good and it's slowly growing, your listeners appreciate fine spirits. They found a home in whiskey, obviously, but if we can hopefully show them something that's, also of a similar standard or a similar quality and something else, I think it might pique their interest. So we've got some
100%.
We've got some little tricks up our sleeves, so hopefully we can
Love that.
we can impress you guys when we get over there.
Awesome. Well, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both.
Jason, before we thank the good Mitch Wilson, as we were leading into our conversation with him, we're having this wonderful conversation discussing, is rum coming? Here's Dave Broom's book. Mitch is going to tell us some history, and he's going to talk about Black Tot, and then you went all negative. And then you're like, oh, Joshua didn't send me any rum. I couldn't enjoy the rum.
And to this day, I still can't enjoy the rum. I'm looking around my office. I still have no Black Tot in here.
It's
Black
true.
Tot, hello, Black Tot.
I should probably...
No Black Tot. Sorry, man.
Pour some for myself.
Yeah, you go ahead. You pour some Black Tot for the news and email segments of this. And I'll just sit and stare at the walls. That cork sounds delicious. Sounds ideal.
I tell you, isn't the packaging... Oh, you know what? You don't have a bottle in front of you, but the packaging is quite nice. It's even better.
And our dear listeners aren't even on FaceTime with you, so they can't even see it. Here, so since I took it negative, I was going to back it up coming out of the interview before we thank Mitch for his time and his education. And I was going to say, you said a word, and we like to occasionally on this podcast stop for a moment to identify words that Joshua says wrong. And so...
That Joshua says wrong?
But here's the thing. Yeah, you named this, category segment. And you say the word primer. And you had me, and this was years ago, because I'd like to prove you wrong. You had me running to the dictionary. Because just like all of the sudden, which we have come to learn takes us back to Shakespeare.
Yes, yeah.
And I think common usage is all of a sudden. I've always known that word that you use as primer, a primer. Wow. And so primer had me thinking, that just seems so wrong. It has to have a root in something right.
Yeah.
And so I went off and I looked it up. I did my research.
Okay.
And you, sir, are 100% correct.
Oh, thank God.
That primer is how we talk about something being an introduction to a larger category. And primer remains the first coat of paint.
One
puts on a wall before putting a coloured paint over the top of it. And so here's my thing. I love having the opportunity to tell you just how wrong you are. I really do. I really live for that. However, I also love it when I learn something from you. And so there's a reason that I've taken to talking about all of this sudden. I haven't started using it. I haven't lost my mind. I'm not syphilitic. But we did get an email. Chris Sebastian did write in to say, thanks for covering my email. My wife was very pleased to hear I'm not syphilitic. So, I'm not a doctor. I just play one on the podcast. Yes, so I like it that I learned about all of this sudden from you. And I like it that I learned about primer from you. It's remarkable. And so I did. I wanted to back it up, take us back for anybody in the audience who was thinking, what the fuck did Joshua just say there? Did he just primer? Like rhymes with trimmer? Like, what is he talking about? I wanted to come to your defense, Joshua Hatton. Yeah. And I wanted to tell those people, look, my best friend and business partner has got this under control. So learn for a second.
Boom.
Learn from him.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason. I appreciate you having my back.
Welcome. Absolutely. This will get us through to the next ridiculous thing you say on this podcast.
And now I'm like racking my brain for ridiculous things to say. I just don't have them, Jason.
Don't try so hard. You'll get it. We're back in your wheelhouse. Don't stress it. But wasn't Mitch fantastic? That was so brilliant. I so enjoyed talking with him and really learning from him.
I found out about Mitch only because Impex had taken on the Black Tot brand, and he was hired on as the brand ambassador for Black Tot, and you can see why. I mean, his knowledge of rum is exhaustive, and as is his knowledge of the history around it. And this was, something interesting in talking with him, in listening to him, but also in talking with Richard Seal, which is an episode we'll be releasing a little further down, is actually you can learn about global history through the lens of rum. And I
100%.
think that is
100%.
such a fascinating idea that
it's the history of colonialism. It's the history of the slave trade. It's the history of the British Empire, and even all the negativity. And I'm putting even a sheen on it, talking negativity. that was transported around the globe, and it's another interesting one that you see, within the history of whiskey. There was a period where the landed gentry, the upper class, those with money, were not drinking whiskey because it was the drink of the peasants. Rum had the same thing going on, where in the newly founded, United States of America, rum was of the British Empire. And so, from 1776 onwards, the United States needs a drink of its own. Then you get the beginning of whiskey, right?
Exactly.
And whiskey with an E. And so it's interesting even how individuals and groups of individuals have defined themselves with regards to key spirits as well.
Yeah, fascinating stuff, man. I'm excited to be, I wouldn't say dipping a toe, but jumping into this world of rum. And, I know you and I are planning to dig even deeper. So with that said, firstly, thank you, Mitch Wilson. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers, Mitch.
Really appreciate the conversation. And for our listeners, if you enjoyed this conversation, we hope you'll stick around. We are, like we've mentioned a couple times in this podcast, we will have a Richard Seal episode, and he is the guy behind Foursquare Rum. So that will be loads of fun.
And he's another one in talking to him where he's framing rum within its history, as a category, and even talking about and I just can't help myself, and I apologize if it's offensive to anybody who is a rum lover, but I can't help but come back to whiskey circles. It's how I understand the spirits landscape around me. But to think about those who would be farming sugarcane and would have a still on site because they were farming that cane.
That's what they did in Scotland, right? Yeah.
Right. But then you end up with kind of the gosh, I want to say ameliorization, and I'm not even sure that's the right word that I want to be using.
Homogenization.
But it is one part of it, right?
Yeah.
Where you then start to lose the individuality you're within it, and it becomes more industrial, right?
There you go, industrial.
And you have the buying up of those who were smaller and more independent, and then you become industrialized sugar production the way we've got industrialized barley production, right? But then rum, same as whiskey, you've then got the retreat back to no, let's bring it back to the farm. Let's return to growing our own cane. On Kilchoman, let's go back to farming our own barley. I've apparently been reading a lot down lockdown. So I just finished Andrew Jefford's,
Pete Smoke and
Spirit.
Yes, that's a great book.
Right? Which is wonderful because it's about Islay and Isla's people as much as it is about the distilleries. But he's talking to Mark French, who owns farmland in the Rins, right? And Mark French, the farmer, is talking about what the future holds. This book was published in 2004. He's talking about this incoming Kilchoman farmhouse distillery and how they're going to look to grow barley on this wonderful, some of the best agricultural land on all of Islay that overlooks Loch Gorm, right? That's on the edge of Macker Bay, right? It's phenomenal reading about that, knowing, now here we are, reading that in 2020 and looking backwards and knowing exactly what came of it, but also Kilchoman going on to buy Mark French's farm and buying Mark French's farmland. And instead of it being Mark French, the one with the distillery, it's Kilchoman that's now the one with the farm. Absolutely fantastic. Another recommendation for our listeners out there, if you got some time on your hands and you're sitting at home twiddling your thumbs.
Well worth the read. Yep.
Yeah, another captivating one. I first picked that up when it was first released and kind of leafed through it. And as I do with a lot of the whiskey books I bring in, I read the introduction, I read the first chapter, I get kind of the lay of the land, something else captures my attention and it goes on the bookshelf and I go off and I read the introduction of something else and then something else captures my attention. It's been really nice returning and just kind of catching up with things I started but didn't finish. So do we have much to say in the news?
We do. We've got a little bit to say in the news. So let's wake up the paper boy.
Extra, extra! Read all about it. Life story of Playboy Penny. Extra, extra! Extra, extra! Read all about it. Me and that Playboy in trouble again. Extra.
Think he's awake?
Without any shadow of a doubt.
So
I think we've heard enough.
We've got a little bit of news, Jason, because tomorrow you and I are launching 2 new casks for sale on the website.
It's true. It's really true. I like that our release schedule has now fallen in line with our podcasting schedule. Because I remember us announcing, if you're listening to the last episode on the day it went live, we were just about to release the Kalila,
which has been selling great guns. We still have a little bit left. We're actually going to take it off of the website for a little bit because we may have mentioned it on the podcast here, or maybe it was just on Facebook, but we now have 2 different shippers.
We do.
And
2 different cities with 2 different warehouses.
Correct. And because of that, we have to choose, which shipper is going to ship which whiskey. And because we've started releasing sherry butts, casks that have, many more bottles coming out of them, we're actually not selling out right away. And so
it's tremendous. Absolutely tremendous.
It's fantastic. So in this case, Caol Ila is being shipped by one retailer, but another retailer is about to start shipping, and I'll get into that in a little bit. Our next 2 casks, and so we're going to shut off Caol Ila for a little bit. We'll turn that back on when we release our Imperial, which is coming in a few weeks. But we're turning off the Caol Ila, but turning back on our blended malt, which is from First Fill Sherry Butt.
Absolutely.
And then the 2 new whiskeys that are being released. One is a 9-year-old blended Islay malt from a First Fill bourbon barrel, which is stunning.
Yep.
And then the second one is a 19-year-old, and this is the 3rd in our line of whiskeys we're calling Stones of Stenness.
Yeah, and I just want to pivot back quickly. I'll let you speak more on the Stones of Stenness in just a second. I just want to pivot back quickly because I know we've talked about this previously, but this blended Islay malt is either from Diageo or Beam Suntory, which means it's either a combination of Caol Ila and Lagavulin or a combination of Bowmore and Laphroaig. And I know we talked about this in the news segment from the last episode, but I just wanted to quickly repeat that because it's a fun little experiment in picking up that single cask and saying, first of all, what would it be like if you put Caol Ila and Lagavulin together? What would it be like if you put Bowmore and Laphroaig together in one glass, right? What would that be like? It's been done. And it's sat for 9 years in First Fill bourbon, which is a wonderful way to explore Islay malts. And so, yeah, there's tons of fun there. And $95 a bottle, I think, puts it at a price point. Obviously, there's no tariffs on the blended malts. And so, I think it puts it at a price point where there's fun to be had there. And I know because it is First Fill bourbon, that one is going to sell out. There's no doubt in my mind.
Yeah. Now, one thing that I want to make very clear here about the blended Islay is even we don't know exactly who the pairing is because the paperwork doesn't say as such. It says blended Islay malt whiskey. That's your paperwork. So all we were able to do is go by flavor. Now, I feel very confident in who I think it is. Do you feel as confident as I do?
Yeah.
You do? Yeah.
I do. Yep.
Yeah. So it'll be really interesting to hear what our nation members think. Right? So, okay, so the blended Islay and then the 19-year-old Stones of Stenness, that one's from a bourbon hogshead, second fill. And actually, we got a fair few number of bottles out of that one, just around 300 from that cask.
Number.
Yep. And that's 195. And so those of you that are listening to this...
Dollars.
Oh, dollars. Not drachmas?
Not drachmas, not pesetas, not euros. $195.
So for those of you who are looking to pick up the blended Islay or the Stones of Stenness, if you missed out on the blended malt, or maybe you said, you know what, I wish I had more blended malt, because we've gotten past the point of potentially selling this out within a few minutes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
If you want to grab another bottle or two, please feel free to do it. And then you'll get your flat $10 shipping rate across that and the blended Islay and the Stones of Stenness. So this is going to be a really good sales day for our members because they're going to get a bigger deal here, or the opportunity to get a bigger deal here.
Which makes it, somewhat selfishly, it's going to be a tough shipping week or two. Anything that becomes that good for nation members is going to have a knock-on effect on shipping. And so things are going to slow down on that part because we're going to be back to, okay, here's a 9-year-old blended malt. Yes, from Islay. Here's a 10-year-old blended malt. Yes, from various regions. Oh, and here's that 19-year-old Stones of Stenness. Okay, boom, that goes into the box. Oh, yeah. So, yeah, we've always said it about our shipping. We try to go slow and steady. We try to limit mistakes as much as possible. Mistakes cost us money. There's just no getting away from that. We're a small company. expensive mistakes in shipping are mistakes we can't afford to have. And so when it comes to having a 10-year-old blended malt from various regions going out at the same time as a blended malt 9-year-old from Isla, we're telling our shipper, slow and steady. Get the 9 right to the people that bought 9, get the 10 right to the people that bought 10, and get the quantities right for people who bought multiples.
Yep.
So,
Yep. As they say, Jason, it's the age-old saying, slow and steady gets the worm.
that's exactly it. That's exactly it. And then all those leaves fall off those branches when all of that sense is made.
What else?
Yeah, the fun continues. And then just because we like to start sowing seeds for it, we're starting to plan, talking about branches on trees and leaves on branches, we're starting to flesh out our 7th retail release and get a sense for what that might look like, not just for the United States, but also for the United Kingdom, Europe, and rest of the world.
And then the other thing that I'll add on here, I mentioned before we have an Imperial coming out. That'll be the second in our woodcut series. Our first was the 30-year-old Bowmore, which was released August of 2019.
It was. We're almost a full year around the sun on that one.
And so come August-ish of 2020 will be our 30-year-old Imperial. That'll be $3.95, just as the Bowmore is, Bowmore was, but Shutter Distillery, 30-year-old juice. Yeah.
For 2 seconds, you gave somebody hope somewhere that was going to reappear on the website. He said is. Was?
He said, damn it. And then the last thing that I want to mention, people have been asking us what's going on with those ryes you talked about, right?
Yep,
We have 2 ryes coming. We're going to have a bit of a deeper dive on that for our next One Nation Under Whiskey episode. We'll go a bit deeper into that, and hopefully, too, we might have at least a little bit more to share on our 24-year-old Kentucky bourbon from a famous distillery that experienced a fire in the 90s.
And, and if we're going crazy with those, we might as well talk a bit more about balconies that next time as well.
Oh, jeez Louise.
Yeah, plenty going on, right? Jeez, it is when you start to break it down. Yeah, we got stuff going on all the time. So, yeah, let's stick a pin in it.
I tell you, when I hear all of these things, for me as a whiskey lover, when I hear like Springbank, they're releasing news, I get their newsletter and I hear what's going to be released, or if Kilhoman is doing something special, I get excited. But every single time I hear this news, I think of this Adam Sandler clip in my head.
I've got a big fucking boner right now.
I see. Well, sexual arousal is not uncommon during periods of nervous tension. I do not take offense.
I'm glad we never get too erudite around these parts.
Jason.
Joshua.
Jason.
Joshua.
Jason.
Joshua.
Jason.
Joshua, I feel so bad for our dear listeners.
Here's the thing. We did have some emails come in, but this is one of the things I love about our listeners. Like the last 3 emails that came in were, each of them had, I would say, 3 to 4 good long paragraphs that require us to do a lot of thinking and a lot of research. And I don't have enough head brains for that right now.
Yeah, my research time has gone on Andrew Jefford and Dave Broom, so I'm a little fully loaded right now as well. And of course, Mitch, we're dedicating our head brain space to what Mitch told us today.
Yep. So rather than bring up something big here, because it's been a long enough episode as it is, let's get out of here on a toast. I'll raise some nice Black Tot rum. Jason, what do you have in your glass? Any Black Tot rum?
That's interesting. Yeah, I poured some Black Tot rum as well. It is delicious. Gosh, I'm smelling the nose. Yeah. It is very nosy. Very nosy. Yep. On the palate, here's my big compliment. On the palate, it is very palatable.
Oh, it's palatable.
And yeah, I stand by that. Color is whatever color I can see in your glass. That's copper. Yeah, it's a good copper color. So yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing.
Gosh, I will get you some.
Pleasure. It's a pleasure. You know, for the dear listeners, that's the first time they're hearing you say that to me. For me, that's not the first time I've heard that promise.
Oh shit! Have I promised you before, and have I let you
and
down?
not just once or twice. We're up to, I think this might be the fourth time you've promised to send me a bottle. So here we are. We're just, you know, I'll just text Sam. Hey Sam, Joshua's failing. Could you help me out?
I'll get demoted. I just got a promotion. Don't get me demoted.
Okay, let's toast our Black Tots and get the
All right.
Black Tot out of here.
Thanks so much again to the good Mitch Wilson, to you, Jason,
Always,
and to our listeners.
always. And to anyone else who may sail in her.
Oh, you know what? For Mitch, this has been a wonderful first episode of One Nation Under Rum.